Sourcing in Procurement and Supply. Unit 5. Sourcing in the Private, Third and Public Sector. Section 6. Key features of public sector procurement. At the end of this section, we should be able to explain the nature of procurement requirements in the public sector, explain the features of procurement in the public sector, identify the principles of public procurement, explain the role of procurement in fulfilling these requirements, and examine the differences between private sector procurement and public sector procurement. The regulation of public sector procurement. Spending in the public sector must comply with detailed legal regulations contained in the Public Procurement Act 2003, Act 663 as amended. The Act and regulations provide the general rules governing public procurement. There are also a number of other regulatory bodies operating in the public sector. We have the Public Procurement Authority, the Economic and Organized Crime Office, Ghana Audit Service, and so on, which are mandated to check misappropriation of public resources. The purpose of these regulators is to protect public welfare and national interest, to ensure compliance with institutionalized standards, and to ensure that taxpayers' money is well spent. The regulators in public sector are responsible for highlighting and advising on best practice, quality standards and service levels, for reviewing and evaluating government strategies, receiving reports and returns on performance, and published evidence-based findings. You can't publish something you are not sure of, you don't have evidence of. So whatever you're publishing, you should make sure there are evidence to back whatever you're doing and the findings. Monitoring and auditing organizational activity for compliance to standards. They need to help customers to make informed choices and, where necessary, complain. The regulators are supposed to communicate and promote the work of the public sector to the public. Why do you think in the public sector we need a body to regulate procurement? We're going to go through some of the reasons why regulation of public procurement is necessary. 1. To ensure that goods, services, and works procured comply with defined public standards and specifications. As the public's funds that are being spent, the taxpayers' money, so you need to ensure that whatever they are doing is in compliance with what the public would want. Not that whoever is in office is spending the money anyhow or doing whatever they want. 2. To ensure that all procurement exercises are compliant with public policies, standing orders and statutory procedures, with the general aim of securing competitive supply, value for money, and ethical procurement. 3. To ensure that all supply chain operations are compliant with law, regulations, and standards in areas such as health and safety, environmental sustainability, employment rights. These are some reasons why public sector procurements are being regulated. In this unit, we highlighted some key features for the private sector as well as some key features for the third sector organizations. Now we're going to go over some key features of the public sector procurement. One key feature is, in contrast to the profit focus of private sector concerns, public sector organizations have a primary objective of achieving value for money. We already explained this. In the public sector, we are not in business to make profits. We are here to serve the people. We are here to achieve value for money for the taxpayers. The range of stakeholders in public sector organizations is more diverse. This includes those who provide the funds and the users. The public sector buyers are subject to a high level of accountability. They must ensure that appropriate processes are being followed to acquire best value for taxpayers, or the taxpayers' money are used efficiently and economically, that appropriate service levels are achieved, and the provision of service to members of the public. These objectives are thought to be best achieved by an insistence on competitive tendering for contracts over a certain size or over the threshold stated in the Public Procurement Act 2003, Act 663. Another key feature is that public sector procurements are governed by, as we discussed earlier, the Public Procurement Act 2003, Act 663. You can't do anything contrary to what is in the Act. Another feature is that there is lack of confidentiality of buyer-supplier relationship in public sector procurement. This results from the compulsory use of competitive bidding ethical requirements, and public interest disclosure of information, which limits the confidentiality of the dealings between the buyers and the suppliers. Public procurement principles. The overall objective of the public procurement system is to provide value for money to the government by ensuring that public funds are spent in a transparent, efficient, and fair manner. Public procurement principles are guidelines that govern the management of public procurement. These principles are highlighted in the Public Procurement Act 2003 Act 663. We're going to go through some of these principles in public procurement. The principles we have here are transparency, integrity, economy, openness, fairness, competition, and accountability. Transparency. The procurement system must ensure value for money in the procurement of goods, services, and works. The procurement system aims at procuring goods, works, and services at the right quality, at the right time, the right place, the right price, through an open, competitive tendering process. The government is entrusted with public funds to provide services to the public. The use of public funds must be conducted in a transparent and open manner, allowing stakeholders and the general public access the information on procurement actions by the government, as well as the means to control and audit all procurement cases. Also, all the rules governing public procurement must be readily made available to all interested parties. Information on the public procurement process must be made available to all public procurement stakeholders, contractors, suppliers, the service providers, and the public at large, unless there are valid and legal reasons for keeping certain information confidential. Examples of confidential information may be proprietary information belonging to companies or individuals participating in the solicitation process, and certain military and defense-related procurements, to mention a few. Integrity, the second principle of public procurement. Integrity means truthfulness, honesty, and reliability. Integrity is twofold in public procurement. We have the integrity of the procurement process and the integrity of procurement practitioners. With regards to integrity of the procurement process, prospective tenderers should have confidence in the procurement process. Everybody should have access to the same information concerning evaluation and selection criteria at the same time. So the process we are using in public procurement, there should be integrity. We should trust the process. The process should be reliable. The second fold of integrity is the integrity of the procurement professionals themselves. We can't have a trusted and reliable process, and the people conducting the procurement, we can't trust them. Then if that happens, the first fold is even nil. We won't achieve that integrity in the process because the person conducting the process is not honest. So in terms of integrity of the procurement professionals, public procurement professionals involved in the public procurement process should at all times be perceived as honest, trustworthy, responsible, and reliable. They must always keep the purpose of the procurement requirement in mind and strive to ensure that they responsibly manage public procurement as mandated by the public procurement rules. Economy. The principle of economy emphasizes the need to manage public funds with care and due diligence so that prices paid for goods, services, and works are acceptable and represent good value for the public funds expended on them. Everyone associated with the public procurement process, directly or indirectly, responsible for facilitating the acquisition of goods, services, and works with public funds should strive to avoid fraud, waste, and abuse of public resources, whether it is the result of overspecification of required goods, paying unreasonably high prices for standardized goods, collusion with other tenderers, or other forms of unacceptable practices. Fairness, another principle of public procurement. In simple terms, we say fair when we are talking about absence of bias or injustice. So in the context of public procurement, fairness means treating all tenderers or all bidders equally. Competition. Given that public procurement is funded primarily with taxpayers' monies, all eligible organizations and individuals should be allowed to participate by submitting offers in response to a specific requirement for which they are qualified. the public sector is to ensure that suppliers are selected not on the grounds of political expediency, socioeconomic goals, favoritism, or fraud, but by transparent procedures which are open to audit and give eligible suppliers an equal opportunity. Public procurement requirements should be widely disseminated to increase the chances of a good market response, leading to the award of competitively priced contracts. Another principle of public procurement is accountability. Accountability in public procurement means that anyone involved in the procurement process is responsible for their actions and decisions with respect to the public procurement process. As public servants, public practitioners, and others involved in the public procurement process are accountable and exposed to sanctions as a remedy for any behavior that contravenes the public procurement rules. You also have an obligation to report or answer to any designated oversight entity and the public on the consequence of your actions and decisions. These are the public procurement principles or principles guiding public procurement. The principles are transparency, integrity, economy, openness, fairness, competition, and accountability. Role of the procurement function in the public sector. We have already gone over some roles of the procurement function in the public sector, but we are going to briefly go over some of these roles again as a way of revision, right? So the first role we have here is that procurement function must ensure transparency in the purchase of goods, works, and services. The procurement function must be concerned with ensuring value for money and compliance to specification. They must adhere to the legal regulations set out in the Public Procurement Act. Research new materials and designs and cost savings. They must also maintain relationships with subcontractors and suppliers. There are other roles we have already highlighted earlier, as well as a lot of roles you can come up with or think of yourself. The private and public sector organizations are different in some key respects, as we have already highlighted some above. We're going to briefly go over some of the key differences or key areas of differences between the private sectors and public sector organizations. One key area of difference is objectives. The private sector objective is to increase profit, is to make profit at all costs. However, in the public sector, our main goal is not to make profit, but to achieve defined service levels. Another key area of difference is responsibility. In private sector, buyers are responsible to directors, who in turn are responsible to shareholders. But in the public sector, the buyers are responsible ultimately to the general public. In terms of stakeholders, in the private sector, purchasing is seen as a defined group of stakeholders to take into account. However, in the public sector, purchasing has to provide value to a wider range of primary and secondary stakeholders. Activity and process-wise, in the private sector, organizations have defined capabilities and resources used to produce goods and services, whereas in the public sector, we need to add value through supply of outsourced or purchased products and services. They tend not to purchase for manufacture. Legal restrictions as an area of difference. In the private sector, activities are regulated by company law, employment law, product liability laws, and others. But with public sector procurement, most of this applies equally to public sector. That is, the company law, the employment law, the product liability law, and other laws. But additional regulations such as the EU procurement directives are also present. In terms of competition, the private sector is usually seen with strong competition, whereas in the public sector, there is usually zero or no competition at all. In conclusion, we have examined the key features of procurement in the public sector, regulations governing public procurement, and the reasons for such regulations. We also discussed that some principles guide procurement such as accountability, integrity, fairness, economy, competition, and what have you. We finally looked at the difference between procurement in the public sector against procurement in the private sector. Thank you.